Let's get this party started. I'd like to invite Colleen Del Vecchio up to the stage. She has over 20 years experience in higher education leadership, constituent engagement, women's leadership, organizational change, strategic management, career counseling, nonprofit board development, and staff development. Colleen has always used a strength-based leadership model to guide her work. Her sessions for constituent engagement and designing individualized networking, mentoring, and training programs has led her work with elite higher education institutions, Fortune 500 companies of all sizes, and local chambers of commerce. Excuse me, my voice is a little dry. Colleen has been the recipient of 2 Turkeyland Co-Foundation fellowships and currently sits on the board of directors. Please welcome to the stage Colleen Del Vecchio, my friend.
All right, here you go. Oh, I know you're going to want your chapstick and your phone, right? All right. That were at the front table. All right, Mo, or can someone in the back bring some handouts up front for folks who didn't get them? So put your hands up if you need handouts. All right. All right, so today we are going to spend the next hour and a half or so talking about your strengths. Right, so how many folks did the StrengthsFinder assessment? Okay, if you didn't, you probably got the email and about 7 reminders from me, maybe 8, and there's a chance that a whole bunch of them ended up in your spam. So if you didn't do it, when you get home, you'll have another 5 days to do it before those codes will get retracted. So you can still do it, you'll still get something out of today, but you won't get everything out of today. So why strengths? You know, many years ago, it was a first date with my now husband, I will fully admit, that we went on our first date, and being the geeks that we are, we started talking about things we love to do. I talked about how my biggest passion is helping people find jobs that give them energy at the end of the day, right? I got so sick of being in jobs where I got home and was totally drained, right? Where I got home from work and I wanted to sit on the couch all night long and not do anything. Right? Or watch 9 episodes of the latest Netflix. That's not what I like to do, right? So I got out there and said, I need to find, my goal was to help people find those jobs. Sorry, as I'm making eye contact to people, and they're making me chuckle. Right? But so I wanted people to find jobs that at the end of the day, they had energy for the rest of their life. And my now husband said to me at that point, he goes, hey, have you done the Clifton StrengthsFinder assessment? And I was like, no, that's one of the few I hadn't. I had done a lot with Myers-Briggs, I had done DISC, I had been training in all of those, but not the Clifton Strengths. So that night, after our first blind date, we got set up on our blind date, I went home, and at 11 o'clock at night, I did my Clifton Strengths assessment. And I felt like it was looking in a mirror, right? I got the report, and I read it, and I was like, this is me. This is me 100%. Everything about it felt like me. And so I went to work the next day and said, okay, we're going to start doing this with all of my coaching clients. I was working at Smith College at the time, and said, let's take this stuff and use it with all of the people I'm helping to find jobs. Because if I can find them jobs that speak to the things they naturally do well, if I can find people jobs or help them find jobs, right, where they get to do the things that they do better than everybody else, then things are going to feel better. You're not going to be exhausted in your job every day, right? You're going to have energy for the rest of your life. And then I started looking into it, right? Gallup is first, it's a research organization, and Strengths is just a little bit of what it does after that. And so for them, they start looking at all the research, right? And what is it they find? They find people who use their strengths every day are 3 times happier in all aspects of their life, not just work, right? It's not just work that this kind of affects. From a work standpoint, employers love this stuff because people are way more productive in their jobs when they're fully engaged in their jobs. When they get to use their strengths, they actually perform better at work. They're happier at work. They actually like their coworkers more, right? And the research kept coming in about all the things it did. And that's where I started with this. So now, all of my coaching, I start with strengths. All of the work that I do with organizations, I start with this assessment for them because that's where I want to build from. So I don't care if you're looking to become a leader in your organization, if you want to make more sales, if you want to do, underwater basket weaving, right? Find a way to do it through the lens of your strengths. And that's where we're going to start today. So we're going to play my little stand-up, sit-down game. So make sure you have room to stand up in front of your table. You don't have to stand up yet. You can stay seated. Right? Okay. Stand up if you were the person who was ecstatic, overly excited to be in a room with 125 people today. Right? To be around this many people, you were like, yes, can't wait to be there. Right? These are my wooers of the world. These are the people who have woo, right? Okay. You can sit down. Thank you. All right. How many of you planned your outfit days ago? You planned what you were going to wear today a week ago, maybe. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Stay with me here. How many of you changed your idea of what you're going to wear today based on the weather? Right? You were like, oh, I woke up today and was like, hey, let me see what the weather's going to be, and then decide. Excellent. All right. How many of you looked in your beautifully color-coded closet this morning where your clothes are set up by season or color and were able to choose your outfit that way? Okay. All righty. How many people love to go into a situation and take charge, especially when things are going wrong? You are the person who loves to show up and be like, I got it. I'm pretty much calling you out today, Denencia, aren't I? Okay. All right, we got 2 more here. How many of you are the person who good is never good enough? Right? You have to take things that are good. You got to make them great before you send them on their way. That little bit of perfectionism, right, gets in your way sometimes. All right. And my very last one is, how many of you are the folks who are really good at getting things started? You are really excited about getting things started. All right, thank you. All right, so I want to tell you a quick story about my friend Kara. So Kara is a person who always loved to get things started, right? She was the person in the office who, when they had to kick off a new project, got everybody really excited about it, right? Got all the ducks lined up, got everything set, and then pushed everyone off and everyone got out and did their work, right? She was so good at getting started. In Gallup Strengths terms, this is someone who's an activator, right? Any activators in the room? Who are my activators? Excellent, right? Except Kara was at buttoning things up at the end and getting them finished, right? And through the years, Kara had been fired from 7 jobs in her lifetime. 7. Because of this, right? People complaining to her that she never finished projects. She never got things done. She's the person, if you go to her house, I guarantee there are 9 projects that are half completed, right? But she has this great skill, this ability to get people excited and started, and she never ever was seen as someone who had a skill in that area. When we did her StrengthsFinder assessment and Activator came up as her #1 strength, she literally started crying across from me, right? She was really crying. And we finally got to the point that she said, 7 jobs I've been fired from, 7. Because nobody saw this as a strength. Everybody saw this as a weakness. Everybody saw my ability to get people started as a weakness because they didn't see it as that was a skill in and of itself. So, we worked together. She ends up getting a job for one of the big consulting firms out there, making probably 4 times the amount she made at all the jobs she was fired from. Because now she goes into companies and gets other people really, really, really excited about getting started on things, right? She has this strength that nobody saw as a strength. Everybody saw it as a weakness. So I say that to get us started because I want you to flip the switch, right? For many of you in the jobs that you have, when you go in for your performance evals every year, my guess it sounds something like this, right? Hey, Sue, how's it going today? Great. Here are the 3 things you did well this year. Now let's talk about the 4 things that you need to improve on this year. Let's make goals based on all the things that you didn't do well and figure out a way to improve them. And if many of you have been working for many years, like most of us have here, my guess is some of those things are the same things that you've gone back to year after year after year, right? How great would it be if you went into your performance eval this year, Jen, and someone said, Jen, here are the 6 things you do well. Let's talk about ways for you to do more of that. Let's really focus on the things you do well and get you the ability to do more. Let's do more of the things that you do well and not focus on the things that maybe you struggle with, right? So that's what we're going to focus on today. We are going to find ways for you to do more of what you do well, more of what your strengths are, and manage your weaknesses, right? There are things that you have to be able to do to be competent in this world, right? You can't, there are things you just can't drop from your job description, but let's get you competent in those, but put the effort into the things you do really well. All right, so to get us started, I want you to talk to the person next to you, or 3 of you if you need to at your table, right? And I want you to tell them about one of your strengths. So you have your report with you. Those of you who didn't do this, I want you to tell the person about one of your great accomplishments. Tell them about something that you've accomplished that you're really good at. But for those of you who have your strengths, tell them about your strengths. Clap once if you can hear my voice. Clap twice if you can hear my voice. What? Okay, wait, we're gonna try that one again. Clap twice if you can hear my voice. All right, thank you. Things I steal from elementary school teachers through the years, right? It's like, I know, if we had all day, we would have just spent like 45 minutes doing this, but we only have an hour and a half to do this today. So we are doing the speed version of going through our strengths. I usually start with folks figuring out their own strengths. So my advice for you when you go home is to look at your StrengthsFinder report that you have and highlight the parts that speak to you, right? Go through that Strengths Insight Guide because that Insight Guide is specific to you. So if, I can't see your name, sorry. Terry, if Terry and I both have Maximizer as a strength, her version of Maximizer and my version of Maximizer are different on that report. I will say this is the part that blew my mind because also when I read it, my version of Maximizer is me 100%. If you read the generic version of Maximizer, it talks about people maximizing things, businesses, stuff. My version of Maximizer talks about me wanting to help maximize people, right? Helping people get from where they are to something better. And that's really me. right? That's who I am. That's how I use my maximizer strength. So go back and go through your Strengths Insight Guide. Go through the whole thing and highlight the parts that really speak to you. Now, the other side of me, the career coach side of me, then always tells folks, use that on your LinkedIn profile. And if you're not on LinkedIn, go, be there, right? That's where we're all talking to each other. So first you start with that, right? You get to understand your own strengths. Gallup calls this the name it and claim it section, right? Where you can name your strength and then you start to see it, right? You're doing things during the week and at the end of the week you're like, oh, totally could see my maximizer strength coming in here. My activator strength showed up there. Hey, look at my communication strength here, right? You start to be able to kind of claim it in your life. I also love seeing when folks can tell me stories going back to their childhood, right? I worked with a woman a couple of months ago, and all of her strengths were in the influencing strengths category. And we were talking, and she started saying, you know, it's funny, when I think about it, back when I was a kid, I used to convince my 2 older brothers to clean my bedroom for me. Right? And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, and my mom never could figure out how I did it. She's like, but somehow I was able to go in and influence my older brothers to clean my bedroom, right? So when you think of some of these strengths, these are really your lens on the world, right? These are your natural abilities, how you go after things, how you do things. And it's different than everybody else. Because the chance of you and someone else having the same strengths, 1 through 34 in the same order, is 1 in 33.4 million. Million, right? So the chance of you and someone else having the same vision in kind of how things should get done is 1 in 33.4 million. So sometimes at a workplace, I always laugh when companies bring me in and say, well, this team, right, they don't look at things the same way. And I'm like, how could they possibly? Why should they? Don't you want people looking at things from different lenses, right? Don't you want that diversity of thought? And not everybody does, right? Some people really want a whole team of people who yes them to death. But I think the teams that are really successful are the ones where folks come in with diversity of thought. People look at things differently. All right, so you do have a handout in front of you, and we're probably going to get through about a third of it today. But the first question I have up there is a great leader, right? Because today we're talking about She Leads, and we're talking about leadership. So what makes a great leader? What are the important things when you think of someone who's a great leader? Shout them out. Communication. Consistent. Credibility. Inspires. Emotional intelligence. Delegate. Compassion. Listen. They lift people up. They're flexible. I feel like that was also a gymnastics reference somehow, that they lift people up and they're flexible. Right? So Gallup went out and surveyed, all of the folks that they do in all of these different companies and asked folks, what do they really need from their leaders? And it really came down to 4 things, right? Everything fell into one of these 4 categories, and they're on the back of your paper, so, right? The 4 things it came down to were trust, compassion, stability, and hope, right? Trust, compassion, stability, and hope. That those are the 4 things it came down to that most people needed from their leaders, right? And this isn't just like leaders as in like the president, CEO, but it's all leaders that they work with, right? The folks who are above them, anybody they work with. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? Folks need this sense of hope. They need a sense that tomorrow is going to be better than today, right? That next year is going to be better than this year. They need hope that things are going to be good where they work. No one wants to go to work every day thinking, wow, it's really great today, but next year is gonna suck. Right? I mean, at that point, how many of you are like super excited to go to work every day, right? Everybody goes to work every day thinking, wherever we are now, next year's going to be better, right? That's where people wanna be. And as a leader, that's what we need them to do, is instill this sense of hope. Right? I'm gonna skip compassion because that's my favorite one, so we're gonna come back to that one. Stability, right? Folks wanna know that they have a job, right? Folks want to know. Now, I will say, right, in the past, I used to say to folks, there's no stable job out there. And people would always come up with me with a list of the jobs that everyone thought were stable. Anyone guess what those jobs are? Right, what were the stable, pre-COVID, what were the jobs that everyone was like, this is stable, you'll have the job for life? Any guesses? Funeral director. That one still might be true. Teacher, nurses, police, fire, right? Like all of the kind of emergency services people. So for the past 2 years, anyone guess the percentage of career coaching I've done to people in those categories? It's probably like 80% of the folks I've done career coaching for are teachers, are doctors, are people who are in the medical field in general. I have police officers, firefighters, emergency personnel, right? Folks don't see those jobs as stable as they once were, right? One, they're different. I mean, if anybody a teacher in the room today? Do we have any teachers? No, they're true. They are all in school, right? I mean, it's been a really rough couple of years for teachers. Any former teachers in the room? Yeah, right. I get a lot of that these days, right? But so from a stability thing, there are no jobs that are stable anymore, right? Because I think of people I know in the medical field who, I have a friend who's an OR nurse who barely worked during COVID because her choice was you go work on the COVID floor, right? Because they weren't doing elective surgeries. And we all know, right, elective, that's like the biggest air quote thing, right? Because it was things like, oh, you can still walk, even though you need your knee replaced, you're good for another 2 years, right? So, there was struggles in many of these industries. So stability, folks want to know that they're not going to get fired from their job tomorrow, right? Everybody knows there's not long-term stability. They also want stability in their boss. How many people have left a job really quickly after their boss has left? Right? I mean, I see it all the time. People leave jobs because of management. They leave jobs because of a change in leadership. So then we get to trust. People need to know they have trust in the people who are above them. Now I need to lower my voice now that the air conditioning stopped. Right? And so when folks look at trust in the workplace, there are so many things that go into that, right? But the big thing it comes down to is, do you trust when your manager says something that it is actually truthful? They're actually going to go through with that. They're actually going to do what they say they do, right? It sounds so simple, but when that gets broken in a workplace, it's really hard to get it back. And then the last one is compassion. I feel like the last year and a half, I have talked more about compassionate leadership than I have anything else, right? How can leaders show compassion? How can leaders have that emotional intelligence to be able to get out there and that their staff feel that there's some compassion? Nobody want to work. I mean, does anybody want to work for someone who's like, oh yeah, my boss, they have the least compassionate person I've ever met, right? It's not like slews of people are running to go work for the person who has no compassion. So today, when we kind of talk about compassion, there's a few things that kind of come into play there to me. One, the biggest one is communication, right? And with communication, I think the first one there is listening. Are folks able to listen to each other? So, you're going to give you about 4 minutes. Pick a partner, and if there's 3 of you, only one of you can be talking, right? If there's 2 of you, one can talk. One of you gets to talk for 2 minutes and tell a story, and the other person cannot say a word. They can only listen. No talking for the other person. I will give you the 2-minute timer, and then in 2 minutes, I will tell you to switch, and the other person can talk. So you can tell whatever story you want. All right? Ready? Go. So how was that? How was it to sit and listen and not say a word for the whole 2 minutes? Hard? I see some hards. Was that really easy for anybody? Okay, there's a handful of people who are good at that. So for the person who is talking, what did it feel like for someone to really just sit and listen to you for 2 whole minutes and let you tell your whole story? You felt like there was a spotlight on you? You wanted them to respond? Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, it allowed you to go more into your story, so you got energized, right? It forces you to go more into your story. When I first said 2 minutes, how many of you thought in your head, and these are my people probably, right? How many thought in your head, like, I can't even introduce myself in 2 minutes, right? Like, 2 minutes, like that, right? There's a couple people like that, right? And then you start talking and you realize 2 minutes is a lot of silence to fill. I have learned, like if you saw me with my phone up here, I have learned that when I tell people they get 2 minutes to do something, I have to set the timer on my phone, because when I didn't, I realized I was interrupting after like 25 seconds, thinking it was like 5 minutes long, right? If I don't set my timer on my phone, I give them way less time. Okay, so now you're gonna get 2 minutes to actually talk to the other person and ask those questions that you wish you could have asked during that 2 minutes, okay? So you get 2 more minutes to actually give feedback or have that conversation. So, how did it feel to get some feedback or to be able to ask those questions? Better? So much better? And needs more time, right? Someday we'll do this as like a 3-day workshop and it'll all be really fun and we can really dive deep. Right, one of the best ways that you can show compassion, right, for folks is that idea of active listening. People want to be heard, right? And even if you can't do what it is they're asking for, right, just to be able to be heard goes a really long way. For folks to be able to tell their piece without being interrupted, to just listen, goes a really long way. So think about that as you kind of are thinking about this leadership piece, right? As we think about compassionate leadership, when I think about that, folks, how many here have empathy on their Clifton strengths? How many have empathy as one of their top 5? Right? Excellent. Okay, right? So are empathy and compassion the same? No, I see no's. No, right? Okay, so empathy, for those of you who have empathy as a strength, right? Empathy is that strength where you are able to feel what other people feel, right? You can walk in a room and you can kind of get that sense. I think people who are really great at empathy, right, who have really kind of honed their empathy strength, can walk into a room and get the sense from someone as to how they're feeling, right? But to be a compassionate leader, for it to be compassion, it takes it to another level, right? And that's what folks need, is they need the action behind it. It's almost like empathy is that strength, it's that feeling, it's that ability, but compassion is taking the next step forward. Now, if you're the person who, you got all of your 34 strengths in order, right? So let's say, you went above the top 5, you got 1 through 34, and you're like, oh, crap, right? How can I be a compassionate leader? Because empathy, it's number 34 for me, right? Way down here at the bottom. And I've worked with leaders who have empathy as number 34. And they have to work hard to be compassionate leaders. But you still can, right? Because you can still show compassion, even if you don't feel what others feel. I think of somebody I was coaching last year who empathy is definitely in the bottom 5 of their strengths. And we started talking about how do you show compassion during a time like COVID, right? And this is how it played out. It played out when, what is your name? Jane, right? So Jane here, now all of a sudden has been star employee for the last 6 months. We're 6 months into COVID, and all of a sudden Jane, she's not really performing too well, right? So the old version of this person would have called Jane and said, Jane, you are not performing well, right? What the hell is wrong, right? Most likely, with the lack of empathy, right? Or, right, more along the lines of not really figuring out if something's wrong. So instead, we have this conversation of, instead of kind of berating Jane for not doing the work that she hasn't been doing, it's freaking COVID, right? why don't you just reach out and say, how are things going? Let's start with that. Because if you have somebody who's been a top performer for a long time and is now not, my guess is something has happened there, right? And so to show that compassion, a very simple, how are things going, goes a long way. And you know what was going? Jane's husband had COVID, right? Had 4 kids who are now homeschooling, who are between the ages of 4 and 10. I don't even know how Jane was like functioning at all as a human being, never mind trying to work a full-time job, right? So this leader called me back and said, okay, now what do I do, right? Now I know what's wrong. How do I be a compassionate leader during this? And I was like, do you trust her? He's like, absolutely, right? She's been a great employee for years. Great, right? Do you want to keep her as an employee? Yeah, right? Because it's the great resignation. 1 out of 7 of you are getting a new job in the next year, right? So what do? We call Jane back and say, hey, Jane, it sounds like you're having a really hard time. How about you take the next 4 weeks off while you figure out how to get this settled, right? Work will be there, and it'll be fine. And you know what? He was like, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can give her 4 weeks off, right? This is not what we do. We have work to do. And I'm like, great. But Jane's going to quit if you don't do this. Guarantee. Jane's not going to be there because there's somebody else who's willing to give her that chance. So, right, that conversation happened. And he said, do you need 4 weeks off? And Jane said, you know what? I only need 2 because then my mother-in-law is coming to live with us to help take care of the kids. And when he reiterated that to me, I had the reaction that all of you had, which was, Jane might need a lot more time off then. Or Jane may need to be the only human being who goes to your office, right? All of a sudden, like Jane gets her own, like hermetically sealed office to be able to go to, because then the mother-in-law is home with the husband and the 4 kids. But, right? But there's a way to do it. And it was a lot different than what's going on, right? Or approaching someone and being, you're not performing well. And starting with a simple, how are things going, right? Because the compassion goes so far. That's a whole different conversation, because how are things going doesn't immediately put you on the defensive, right? If I say, what's going on? Why are you not performing? Right? Nobody's going to react well to that. So think about, right, how can you approach things from a compassionate way? How can you put compassionate leadership out there? All right. So the next part of this that I want to talk about is this idea of dealing with conflict in the workplace. And this is where your strengths are really going to come in handy, right? Because how you approach conflict, if you try to approach conflict at your workplace or in your life in a way that doesn't fit naturally to you, it's never going to work. It's never going to be good, right? It's not going to work well. A few years ago, I actually did my strengths training with someone who was the captain of a submarine. And John had some really great, interesting experience. And one of the things he always kept talking about was this idea that the average age on a submarine was 23. The average education level on a submarine was high school level education. Yet here was a group of mostly men, and in his day it was only men, right, who are now living together in very tiny, tight quarters, who managed to work on nuclear submarines for, I think it's 60 years now, that there's never been an incident, a nuclear incident on the submarine, right? And so in most of your workplaces, if I came in tomorrow and said, you know what, we're going to fire all of the leadership and replace it with a whole bunch of 23-year-old high school graduates, you'd all be like, well, that's crazy, right? How can a bunch of 23-year-old high school graduates possibly run our business? Like, they don't know how to do this. And John always talked about the biggest thing that happened on a submarine was this idea of positive conflict. And it really stuck with me. Because he said, on a submarine, if you are the person who leaves your dirty socks in your bunk and the bunk smells, somebody's going to address it right then and there with you. Right? They are not going to go to the leader. They're not going to go to the captain of the submarine. They are going to walk up and say, Jane, your socks smell. Will you put them away or wash them because it stinks for the rest of us? Right? They are going to address small conflict right away until it gets big. And he said this kind of idea of being able to address small things before they got big actually made conflict to be a positive thing on the ship. Because when we were able to realize I could yell at Jane about her stinky socks, and yet we can still work together and be okay and be friends, is a really good thing. And for a lot of us, we avoid conflict immensely in the workplace. And then what happens? What happens when you have the coworker who's making you crazy? It blows up, right? So when I worked at Smith, there was somebody who had my very similar role at Smith, and we had very similar titles, and we worked together a lot. And we drove each other crazy. And if you ask the vice president who we reported to, we were probably the cause of most of her grief for about a year when the two of us got put on a team together. And what we realized was my strengths, my top two strengths are maximizer and strategic. Anybody else have the maximizer strategic combo here? Right? You are my people, right? So maximizer and strategic tends to move fast because we want to take things that are good and make them better, and we're strategic. So we think about things and we're like, oh, this is the right way to go. Wait, we're going the wrong way? Fine. Let's go this way instead, right? It's no big deal for us. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to move fast. I think in a lot of terms, it's like the idea of agile mindset, right? You take the things, you keep going until they don't work, and you change them and you make them better. Great. Well, this other person that I worked with, her top strengths were analytical, deliberative, input, intellection, and focus. Those of you who don't know those, you can look at them on your list really quick, but if you look at, right, analytical, deliberative, input, intellection, focus. Much slower, right? And we drove each other bonkers, right? Because her deliberative strength made her a great person for things too, right? Except she wanted to be able to take things, look at them, read them, digest them, have a thought about them, and then give her feedback on them. I sat in a meeting and was like, that sounds like a great idea, Stephanie, let's go do it. And then we walk out the room and I'm planning, big events or, right, whatever it was. Like, I was like, great, let's do it, let's get it implemented, keep going. We're very different. And there was a lot of conflict. It was not positive, right? It was definitely not positive conflict. So we got about a year into this and I said, why don't you do your strengths assessment? And let's compare ours. So she did hers and we realized those are her strengths. Or she got her strengths and she's like, oh, this is me, 100%, right? I love the idea of taking information and really being able to muddle on it and then give the idea. I was like, oh my God, that's my worst nightmare, right? Like, I talk out loud. I talk out loud about things. I have something I want to do. We're going to talk it out loud. We're going to move it and go fast, right? So when we sat down and we found the middle ground, because, right, what made sense was she brought a lot to the table. Because she's the person who is much more risk averse than I am at work. And so she was able to say things like, how about we take a pause, we think about this, and then tomorrow we execute on it. So we decided, we came to kind of a middle ground, that whenever we decided on something, I would wait usually 24 to 48 hours before I would execute on it. Which, to me, you heard me, 2 minutes felt like it was a lifetime to give you, right? To like sit here silently. Forget about it if you tell me I need to wait 48 hours to do something, right? I have something and I'm like, I'm so excited, let's do this, right? This morning, before I left, I had someone ask me for a proposal. And I was like, oh, I can get it to them tonight when I'm done with this conference. Then I'm like, okay, wait, no, right? Because after this conference, we're all going to Abandoned Building Brewery, and I probably don't want to write a proposal after that. Just saying, right? But right, so then we sat down and found that middle ground. We figured out how to work together. And then the next 3 years, we worked together seamlessly because we looked at what each of us brought to the table. And we looked at it and saw it as a strength. I didn't start seeing the fact that she moves slower as something that drove me crazy anymore. I looked at it as, wow, because she does that, she catches some things, right? She catches things that I might go do that would have been wrong. And we all have these different strengths that we bring. And if you're able to kind of see your strengths, figure out what you bring, and know your blind spots for them, right? The maximizer in me, it's the perfectionism in me, right? I am the person who sometimes things are just never, ever, ever done because I want to take things good and make them better. Every time I present, I redo my PowerPoint slides. Every time. And I really had to stop myself. And I'm like, well, it's way better that when I'm doing a presentation for Converse that I put in pictures of Converse sneakers. And then when I'm doing a presentation for Mount Holyoke that I put in pictures of people who go to Mount Holyoke, right? And I kept doing that over and over. And I'm like, I don't have to. It's still good. It's okay, right? So it's knowing your strengths and knowing what are those blind spots that might be getting in your way as a leader. All right, so on the back of your page, you actually have all of those kind of definitions of hope, compassion, stability, and trust. And the blank spots across the top are for you to put your strengths across the top there, right? So you put your 5 strengths across the top. And the idea of this grid is that you actually can think about your strengths and think about how you can use those strengths to instill hope, compassion, stability, or trust. All right, so your strengths go in those top boxes across the top there, in the line that says, how can you use your strengths too? And we haven't been able to spend that much time today on your strengths, right? I would love to have spent an hour really diving into these, but we don't have all that time today. But I want you to pick your favorite for now. Or if you don't have a favorite strength yet, choose your top one. And I want you to think about how that strength can help you instill the idea of either hope, trust, stability, or compassion. Does someone want to throw one of their strengths out and we can do an example? Woo. Okay, so the woo people always try to go first. Right? Okay, let's throw another one out there. How about let's do responsibility? How many people have responsibility? All right, hands up too if you have responsibility and empathy? Okay, for any of you who just raised your hand that you have responsibility and empathy, if your boss is here, I want whoever your boss is to look you in the eye and tell you now that you need to take 2 weeks off this summer. Because I will say to you that the responsibility-empathy combination are the people I worry the most about with burnout. They are the people I worry the most about because they don't take time off, usually. They are the person who will be so responsible that they will go to work every day, regardless of what it does to them. Okay, so wait, let's talk about responsibility. If you are somebody who has responsibility as a strength, responsibility sounds like, if I say it, I will do it. It's like you sharpened it on my forehead. Can I pick on you, Megan? Okay, my lovely child is here today, my 18-year-old child, right? And so when my daughter was young, responsibility was her top strength. You can do this assessment. There's one for kids. Of course, I made my kids do it when they were 8 and 9 because, right, this is what I do. Responsibility number 1. My husband, responsibility number 2. My stepdaughter, responsibility number 2. Me, responsibility 32. Right? Doesn't mean I'm an irresponsible person. It's just not how I lead. But this is how that played out in my house for many years when the kids were little. I would say on a Friday, hey, how about this weekend we go see, enter a movie, right? We go see the new Star Wars movie. Great, this is me Friday after school. Sunday night, as we're putting the kids to bed, one of the kids would say, so, are we going to the movie tonight? Are you waking us up at like 10 p.m. and we're going to the movie? I'm like, what are you talking about? Right, and they're like, you said we're going to the movie. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? Because to me, I talk out loud. But for people who have responsibility, when they say something, they will do it. In this same house, one year, my husband said to me, hey, do you want to go to Montreal for New Year's Eve? Me, sure. Oh, I don't care, right, great. Sounds like a great idea. We don't have the kids, they're with the other parents. Go to Montreal for New Year's Eve. This is in October. On December 26th, we're leaving on the 27th, he says, so do you have a dog sitter? I'm like, dog sitter for what? You're like, for Montreal. We're going for New Year's Eve. 2 days, right? We're going to Montreal for 5 days for New Year's Eve. I was like, oh yeah, right? Because when you said that, you meant it. When I say it, it's always a possibility. And it got me in a lot of trouble at home, right? There was many years where my husband had to intervene as I said something, and he'd look at the children and say, so Colleen is lying. What she actually means is, this is a possibility of one of 100 things we might possibly do this summer, right? So when Colleen says, let's go to Ireland this summer, it doesn't actually mean we're getting on a plane and going there, right? I had way too many years of disappointed children because of me talking out loud. But if you have responsibility, right? It's the difference between responsibility high and I'm not irresponsible. I just talk out loud. It's not how I lead. So if you are someone who leads with responsibility and you are trying to instill hope in the people in your organization, right? My guess is, right, hope that the future will be better. Now, if you have high responsibility, you are probably not going to be the person who stands up and says, tomorrow's going to be way better than today. It's going to be great, if you don't 100% believe that, right? During COVID, anybody who had high responsibility, instilling hope was hard, right? Because you didn't know that it was going to be better, right? You wouldn't be able to stand up and say, this is going to be the case because you didn't know. Nobody knew. Right, I think back to how naive we were as we came into COVID. We had a trip planned to Disney 3 weeks after, right? We were getting on the plane. We were celebrating 2 Sweet 16s and 2 50th birthdays in Disney. I had t-shirts made. I had pins. I had sashes. I had cake toppers. I was all in. 50th birthday, Sweet 16s, right? My niece, who was going to be 4, had a big Frozen pin that said, I'm part of the Sweet 16 squad, right? No, they're still sitting in the drawer. We did go to Disney eventually, but, right, we all thought, oh, well, we're canceling the trip, but we rescheduled it for June. Then we rescheduled it for September. Then we rescheduled it for January. Then we finally gave up and rescheduled it for a year from December, right? But in the beginning, we didn't know the answer. But I was so hopeful in my lack of responsibility piece, right, that I was like, oh, yeah, it's going to be better tomorrow. Yep, totally, 100% believe it. But if responsibility is your thing, if you lead with responsibility, that would have been hard to do because you didn't have that answer, right? So when you think of, if you have responsibility, what are some of the things you can do to instill hope or compassion or stability or trust in people? You can be transparent.
You can be transparent in a way that is intuitive to the people that you work with, especially when they're looking to you for hope. That's imperative. And I think with everything that's going on in the climate that we're in, transparency is one of the things as leaders. Sometimes there's a conflict. I'm not saying, oh yeah, the company's closing tomorrow, so you should probably buck up and look for something else. But more like, this is the expectation and this is how we can win together.
I love that, right? So if you have high responsibility, to be transparent, right? I mean, for anybody to be transparent, but right, if responsibility is what you lead with, that lets you be honest, right? To be able to say, this is where we're standing. We don't know the answers. That's hard for a lot of people, right? It's hard for a lot of people to, particularly people who are in leadership positions, to sit at a table and say, I don't know the answer. That's great, thank you. What else? What else can folks do to show trust, compassion, stability, or hope? Consistency, right? How many folks have consistency as one of their top strengths? You are the people I envy most in the world, right? So we're picking all the strengths that are in my bottom. Consistency is straight up 34 for me. When I got my list of 1 through 34, I remember seeing consistency and bursting out laughing and thinking, gosh, they know me so well, right? Did someone actually sneak in the house, right? Because I know if I need to do something consistently, I need to pay someone. I need someone to help me with consistency. If I need to go to the gym on a regular basis, I need to hire a trainer, right? Because then I show up. Or I need to have a buddy, right? I've learned that I'm just not naturally consistent. It's not the lens I have on things. So if you do have that lens, lead with it. If I tried to lead with consistency, it would be a colossal failure because I would never be consistent about it. Right? It just wouldn't, right? If I tried to be like, hey, we're going to do this at this same time every day. I had a team at one point who wanted to do the scrum huddles, right? That every morning we were going to scrum for 10 minutes. And it was like, 4 out of 5 days I would forget it. I'd be getting coffee for everyone. I mean, it's just not naturally my thing. Once a week, staff meeting, great with that. 10 minutes every single day that we don't put on our calendars because we all naturally know that we're all going to stand in this place for 10 minutes just doesn't work for me. And I love the idea of Scrum. If it's not on my calendar or if it's not written down or someone isn't like, come on, Colleen, right? It's not where I go. So think about how you would naturally lead and how can you take what you lead with and give trust, compassion, stability, and hope. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes this time. You get actual time at your table, right? I want you to either do it yourself if you're someone who likes to nose down, or talk with others and say, how can we do more trust, compassion, stability, or hope? Pick one, because you're not going to get through all of them in 10 minutes, right? And talk about your strength and how your strength can kind of show that up. I'm going to wander around, so if you need some help with your strengths, raise your hand and I will show up at your table and kind of chat with you. Okay, so I know it's so hard because I would love to give you all a half hour, 45 minutes to have each of these conversations. But like I said, we just don't have that time today. Okay. Anything come up in that anyone wanted to ask? I know we had a question in the back about like kind of combinations of strengths. We have 16 minutes left of this part. So I want to make sure everyone gets what they need. Does anyone have any specific questions about their strengths or strength that they heard of or something they need some clarification on?
First of all, I thought I was empathetic and I thought
Okay, so
empathetic, warm and fuzzy, compassion, leader. I am a strategic, relator, learner, focused achiever. But after sitting at the table with my new friend, it's right.
well, and my bet is that your relator, right? Relators of the world are the people who are really good at one-to-one. Right? Relators are really good at, right, let's have a deep conversation. But it's just different than empathetic, right? Because you're really good at doing the one-on-one piece, it doesn't necessarily mean that, right, when you walk into a room, you feel what people feel, which is what empathetic is. It also could be that empathetic is number 6 for you, right? For some of you who got your strengths and you're like, God, I'm so 100% a woo. Right? Where is my woo? Right? It's usually the one that everybody wants. For some reason, I want some more consistency, but everyone else wants woo. If you're like, where's my woo? I feel like I'm woo. If you get your whole 34 strengths, there's a really good chance that it's number 6. Right? If it really truly is you, there's a good chance it's in that list because you can get a report that gives you all of your strengths as well. And I also think when you read your descriptions, go through and read it. Your relator might really talk about your ability to be empathetic, right? It doesn't mean if that word is not there that you are not that, right? It's almost why I hate giving people their full 34 when we first start talking about strengths, because I guarantee if all of you got the full 34, where do you look first? 34, right? Everyone's like, what's number 34 for me? Last page is that, right? And then you all leave with this mentality of this is what I'm missing. And that's the polar opposite of what I want you to leave with. What I want you to leave with is the idea that you have these strengths that make you different than everybody else. That's your unicorn, right? Put more effort into your strengths, manage your weaknesses, right? I manage my consistency, 100%, right? Like I said, I hire a trainer at the gym when I want to go to a gym. I hire a house cleaner because you know what? I wasn't good with consistently mopping the floor either. Also don't like it. But, right, it's like the things that I need help with consistency, I hire that. Right, I'm a coach, I hire a coach for myself, right? Because I need someone who I am responsible to get some things that I have to get done consistently. Or I do things like, I hire someone to send my invoices because I hit the point where I would be 2 months behind on, sending billing out. Well, that doesn't make for a good entrepreneur, does it? Right? Can't be paying college tuition if I don't have any money coming in. So, right, think about it that way. All right, any other questions? Yep. Right, but I mean, being able to pick up on people's energy and kind of figuring out what's wrong with people, it may not be that that's necessarily empathetic. It could be you're a good leader, right? You're a good leader that you know your people. I think of it, right, I can think of it as a parent at this moment, being a solopreneur at the moment. I can tell you when something's wrong with my kids, right? I can tell you when they walk home that you're like, oh, something crappy happened today, right? Either they're going to tell me or they're not, right? But I can at least lay it out there and say this, right? And the same thing with your employees, right? If you're a good leader and you are observant of them, you can do that without it technically being empathy, right? And you're a relator as well. All right, any other general strengths questions? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, right. Positivity is that strength of the folks who get people excited because of their positivity, right? They're the glass half full people. Now, it doesn't mean that they're the Pollyannas of the world and can't see things that are negative, right? That's one of the things that I get from some folks who have positivity. They're like, ugh, right? Everybody thinks I'm always happy, right? Being the person with positivity doesn't mean you're always happy. It means you're really good at seeing the possibilities, right? And being someone with woo doesn't mean that you want to show up into a room of 500 people every day, all day. But it probably means you're like me, and when you get on an airplane, you're going to talk to the person next to you, right? I almost feel naturally rude if I do not sit down and introduce myself, much to the horror of my family. I probably have 100 LinkedIn connections who are people that I've sat next to on airplanes. Easily. I am that person. I'm also nice enough to say, hey, if you don't want to talk to me, that's fine. But if you do, I've met some really cool, interesting people on planes. Right, but not everybody who has positivity has woo, and not everyone has woo who has positivity, right? But they do show up together a lot. Okay, yes, in the back corner. Yes. So there is a lovely 600-page document that actually explains in depth how they do this. I'm happy to send it to any of the analytical folks in the room who would like to review such a thing, right? Right? I know some people, this gets them really excited about it. Right? So pretty much what they're doing is they're seeing which one is more like you, right? And if you take too long, it skips it. It's timed because they want you to really go with your gut instinct, right? So you're picking the one that is more like you. And truthfully, if you pick too many of the middle, right, you have the choice for neutral. If you pick too many neutral, it comes up at the end and says, I'm very sorry, we can't give you your strengths. This only happened to one person that I've ever done that with. And it was horrible, I have to say, right, to sit across from someone and be like, you have no strengths. right? Which of course isn't the case. Too indecisive. But, right, they're trying to really see what is you most of the time. So if you actually got your list of 34 strengths, if you got all of them in the list, I always tell folks your top 5 aren't like your dominant strengths. It's really what is you most days, right? Go down that list and draw the line. So for me, I usually draw that line at about number 8. That's me most days. I've worked with some people who will go down to like 15, not to make fun of the men of the world, but it was rarely have I seen a woman go more than about number 9 or 10, and I've seen a lot of men go to number 14 or 15, right, to say that then most of the days. But, right, you'll make that list see what makes sense for you. And the questions do seem really funny. I mean, I used to explain it to people. It's almost like saying, like, I like pickles. I like to go out dancing, right? They don't have anything to do with each other. And so it's really which is you. It's really trying to get at what is you most of the time. The strengths, if you get all 34, the middle are like what is you some of the time, and then what's rarely you is really what it's getting at. Yeah, right? And so if you couldn't hear, because I know the air conditioning kicked on, right? Jasmine was saying that when we first did this, there was 5 people in the room who had empathy, and I made them all read each other's version. And she kept thinking, that's them, that's them, that's them, and not me. And if any of you know her, she definitely has empathy, right? She's really good at her job and what she does because she's able to kind of get the feel for people. And sometimes we just don't see that in ourselves. That is one of the things I love about StrengthsFinder, right, is for you to be able to see this is who you are, right? The first time I did it, I felt like someone was holding a mirror up to me, right? It was like someone kind of followed me around for a month and came up with this report. So I'm like, how could it be so accurate? And then the more I read it, it's like the more accurate it felt over time. So sometimes you don't see the things that you're naturally good at. If you feel that way about your report, give it to someone who knows you really well. Give it to a coworker, a boss, a partner, right? Somebody in your life who knows you. Have them read it and ask them if it sounds like you. Because my guess is you might have some blinders on that you're not seeing all the great things about you that others see in you every day. All right, so in our last 4 minutes here, one of the pieces I love about Strengths is it helps you figure out what you bring to your teams, what you bring to the table, what you show up with. So on the bottom of the page with all of the boxes, right, the bottom left has 2 questions. And the first is, this is what I bring to my team. And if you're a solopreneur or, right, you work by yourself, think of what do you bring to your business? What do you bring to the table? Right? Think about what do you bring to the table that is unique and different? Right? What is your lens that you show up with every day that makes a difference? And then the part that's under that is, this is what I need to be successful. Because your strengths, there's always something that your strength needs to be successful, right? Your strength brings things to the table, but it needs the ability. So when I think of a strength like strategic, right? Strategic is a strength that I bring to the table, the ability to almost make gut instinct decisions. Right? I have the ability to sit there and be like, this is the path we should go down. But what I need, right? I need a place that is going to give me the ability and allow me to make those decisions. Because if you're not going to allow me to make those decisions, then I'm not going to be able to bring that strength to show up. Right? I need to be able to course correct. Because strategic I also figure out when we're going down the wrong path. Even if it was the path that I laid and I said we should go this way. Right? We might get halfway down. I'm like, oh, okay, nope. This is not how we should be going, right? Let's all take a step to the right, right? So that's what I want to be able to do. So think about what your strength brings and what your strength needs. I don't have them for you today because I didn't have the ability to print out 140 versions of this very specific document. But if this is stuff that really intrigues you, I have some other reports that from a wonderful company in Australia that makes for me, that's put together, that kind of really dives into your strength and talks about what your strength brings to the table and what it needs to be successful. So if you loved this stuff and want to dive deeper, shoot me an email. My email's on the bottom of all of these, and I can send you that page for your strengths. It's going to take me time because it means I have to like upload your results into my fancy Excel spreadsheet and then be able to send it to you. But I will do that for folks too. So by the end of the day today, you will see me again when we do the panel, but there is the 2 boxes there that says actions I'm going to take and people I'm going to connect with. I want to make sure you're thinking about that during this next part, because I want you to think about when you leave here, what are the actions you're going to take because you were here today? What are the things that you learned that you want to bring back to your workplace? And who are the people that you want to connect with because you were here? I will say this is my favorite part of what I do is connecting people. I probably spend an hour every day either talking to someone I haven't talked to before or making a connection and saying, you need to talk to you, right? You guys connect because there's some reason. So be that connector. Find someone today to connect with. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I live there. I am LinkedIn according to my name tag, and I do love name tags.